Why? There's more cameras up there.
Good evening, and welcome to Pérez Art Museum, Miami. My name is Anita Bram, and I'm the manager of adult programs and community partnerships here at PAM. This evening, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a program that has been over a year in the making and that I've had an absolute blast arranging. Artist, advocate, editor, and a force to be reckoned with, Sharon Louden, has been moving nonstop to make tonight happen. I've been told tonight is the 69th stop of Sharon's soon-to-be over 100-stop conversation tour for her second book, The Artist as Culture Producer, Living and Sustaining a Creative Life. And we are absolutely thrilled that Pam is included in this astounding tour lineup. I'll keep it brief, and we'll introduce Sharon Louden and Hrag Vartanian, and we'll then let Sharon introduce our two guest artists, Michelle Weinberg and Layden Rodriguez-Casanova. Sharon M. Louden is an artist, educator, advocate for arts, and the editor of the Living and Sustaining a Creative Life series of books. She graduated with a BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and an MFA from Yale University School of Art. Her work has been exhibited in numerous venues, including the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, the Drawing Center, Carnegie Mellon University, Wiseman Art Museum, National Gallery of Art, Birmingham Museum of Art, Weatherspoon Art Museum, and the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art. Sharon has taught for more than 25 years since graduating from Yale University School of Art in 1991. Sharon is a full-time practicing professional artist who lives and works in Queens, New York. Hrag Vartanian is editor-in-chief and co-founder of Hyperallergic, a publication he created in 2009 in response to the changes in the art world, publishing, and the distribution of information. Breaking news, award-winning reporting, informed opinions, and quality conversations about art have helped Hyperallergic reach over 1 million readers per month. Hrag launched the Hyperallergic podcast in 2016, which travels around the globe to uncover the evolving world of art. In addition, he has curated projects, exhibitions, and has organized public events since 1997. Highlights of his curatorial efforts include exhibitions at BAM, Storefront Gallery in Brooklyn, New York, and the hashtag The Social Graph at Outpost, the world's first multidisciplinary exhibition of social media-related art in 2010. Beyond his writing, he is an avid photographer and collector of photographs. He is committed to serious, playful, and radical storytelling that pushes the boundaries of writing. Immediately following the Q&A portion of the panel, please stay to get your signed copies of The Artist as Culture Producer, Living and Sustaining a Creative Life, and Living and Sustaining a Creative Life essays by 40 working artists. Thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you to our guests for sharing your work and insight with Pam and our audience. Please join me in welcoming the panel.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you all. It's great to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Anita. And Adrienne, where's Adrienne? Is she here? Adrienne, and most of all, I have to thank Franklin Sermons. I think everything is, at least in my life, is pretty personal, where my professional contacts and my personal contacts connect. And Franklin and I met each other in 2000 in a residency called Art Oh My. And back then, he wasn't wearing a tie. I'm still not used to him wearing a tie as the director of this museum. I'm so happy he's going to see this recorded. It would be great. And so he was a writer and a freelance curator at that time, and we've stayed in touch all of these years. And when I was putting this tour together, we had already been to LACMA, where he was the chief curator on my first tour. And I said, I really want to collaborate with you again. He said, come to Pérez. So that's why we're here today. So thank you very, very much for having us. And I'm thrilled to be here. I just want to also introduce these two exceptional artists. I've realized in the last couple of days that how many artists are in the audience here today? Can you raise your hands? Oh, I love you all. Woo! This is good. I feel a lot more comfortable. And then you probably know Michelle and Layden, right? Does everybody know Michelle and Layden? Yeah! Woo! Do I really have to introduce them? I should, right? So let me start with Michelle. Michelle and I met actually 3 years ago, right? At the Girls Club, where you are, I just want to get this right, you're the creative director there in Fort Lauderdale. And then you also, what you do here, you do a workshop and mentorship programs for teens here at Pérez Art Museums, which is fantastic. But also, Michelle is really active. She's one of the most generous artists that I have found. And a lot of people have connected me to Michelle over the years. She works in painting and collage, and she designs rugs. That's very interesting to me. I didn't know that. Tiles, mosaic, and paints murals. You do everything, it seems like. She's the recipient of many fellowships and residencies, including the 2017 Lower Manhattan Cultural Council Creative Learning Grant. She has also received a Paula Krasner grant and a Wavemaker grant from Cannonball, Miami, which is no longer in existence. Isn't that correct? You can use your microphone, if you don't mind.
I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure I can
Right,
officially
sad.
speak on that. Yeah.
It was wonderful. I was on their advisory board. I haven't heard from them in a long time.
Wavemaker is happening, though.
Wavemaker is.
Wavemaker is
Great.
happening,
But
yeah.
you know what? Temporary is still good, better than nothing. She also has received individual fellowships from the state of Florida. And she's also from the National Foundation for Advancement in the Arts. Is that correct?
That's what brought me here to Miami.
Oh.
It's not, now it's called Young Arts.
Yeah.
But it's the same organization that always granted the high school scholarships to talented
Young
art
Arts.
students.
We were just
Yep.
there yesterday.
Yep.
That's amazing.
So it kind of morphed into that, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So she's shown in so many places as well. And do you currently, you're in a group show at Westbeth, correct, right? Is it opening?
No, actually, it's another show in New York that's organized by an independent curator, Renee Ricardo, who has a lot of friends in New York area.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank
And then Layden and I have just recently met, but I was very inspired by a phone call that we had that was pretty strong and powerful, certainly generous in this community, as everybody here who knows him would agree. He is one of the directors of Dimensions Variable here in Miami. And where is that located, actually? Is it far from here?
It's just down the street at Miami-Dade College.
Can you describe what it is for everybody and why you started this?
So basically, Dimensions Variable is a project that we started in the front part of a studio that we had in the design district. It was a donated studio. There were other artists there that we were sharing the studio. And, you know, it was a lot of space, so we thought that it would be a good idea to activate the front part of the space. And then we started inviting our peers to come and do projects. We had no funding, but the lure of getting someone a residency in Miami was very effective. And so people started coming, and then we got funding, and we were able to pay people, and it was great.
It's awesome, and you're an active practicing artist at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You've shown at the Center for Architecture and Design here in Miami. You've also shown at the Bass Museum of Art, the Abrams Art Center in New York. I'm just skipping your long resume. The Frost Art Museum here in Miami and Sculpture Center in Long Island City. And your work is in several collections, including here at the Pérez, correct? And your work has also been talked about, New York Times, Art News, Art in America, et cetera. Well, thank you very much for being here as well.
Thanks for having me.
And I really want to thank also Hrag for being here, who wrote the foreword to my book, and I consider him a very close friend who's really wonderful in giving so much to artists. The reason why we're here today is because, as Anita said, this is a 69th stop of over 100 stop. I'm going to try to stop at 100. But I'm thrilled that it's gotten, to 100. But what I'm doing here today, or what we're doing here today, is I really love to be able to share information with artists. And I believe that artists not only contribute to the creative economy, but we really contribute to the well-being of others. And this book that I did, which is Artist as Culture Producer, came out of a tour and a book that I did previously, Living and Sustaining Creative Life, where we did 62 stops on a tour, and it's in its 7th printing. But it's a shared project. The royalties of both books are split among all the contributors. So our first check for that first book was $10.04 a person. But everybody gets their own copyright. Both of those two things are unusual in publishing for an anthology. So it's taking an idea or a project and doing something different with it. In addition, though, these books and this book currently is a platform for conversation. So every conversation is recorded, and then it's definitely going into, I want to say like a data bank or a database that then will be shared in different ways. We're planning on sharing it in exhibitions, in print, and also online, so that our voices are heard. Basically, all of you here being here and us having a conversation in the moment, this information will then be out into the world, which is really powerful. So in the middle of this tour, I started to notice that when I ask artists what they want and need, it's sort of like worms come out of cans like crazy. And so what I decided to do on this tour, in the middle of the tour, like I said, is that we're going to have a moderated conversation to warm you up. I want to hear what you want and what you need, because I'm sure if you don't know what you need, you know what you want, right? And vice versa. Would every artist know, like, in a minute what they need or want? I'm sure you do, like in a second. And then, so the format of this is we're going to take maybe, I don't know, maybe a half hour to be able to have a conversation and talk about sustainability and also artist citizen. I'm very interested in that. And then we're going to open it up to you to have exchange. And then we're going to sign books afterwards, right? Okay, so what I did was I gave some questions to everybody here in advance, and then I'm just going to go through them a little bit. So can you talk about, let's just start here, Hrag. Can you talk about, to share with everybody a little bit, you know, not only what Hyperallergic is and how you started it, but also I want you to share a little bit about yourself as a curator, a writer, a photographer, and how you wear multiple hats.
So Hyperallergic, for those of you who may not know, we started roughly around 8 years ago. And it was partly, I mean, I think it's probably true about anybody in a creative profession. You sort of conjure up or create something that doesn't exist because it sort of helps you live in the world some way. You know, it's like it helps you, you know, go work through your ideas. It helps you sort of create communities. It helps you do a lot of those things. And for us, it was really important to kind of create a digital native publication that was also sort of about the internet as well, like and part of the internet. And I think that was really, really important for us. And also because I sort of discovered that I was like, my passion was online art writing. You know, it was like I didn't really want to be in print. It wasn't really that interesting to me, you know, and so for me it was sort of like, okay, how do we do this? And that became like a problem that was partly that we needed to solve, because then what does that mean? How do you actually create it? How do you allow it to live? How does it work? And it was really important for us to also pay writers, even if it was very little, and sort of incrementally increase it. But it was an important commitment to us because, you know, I was being asked to write for free everywhere. You know, it's like hey, so if you told someone you like writing online, they're like, oh, you must have other jobs, you know? And it was like, and that is often true. And for the first 3 years of Hyperallergic, I did have another job, you know, but eventually it sort of allowed to sort of launch these different kinds of opinions, voices, as well as, you know, talk about the content, you know, and talk about actually being a publication online. But then I realized that, you know, a lot of that, and I think this is not a new conversation. At that time, there was a lot of conversation about curating, sort of curating content, you know? And it was like, and I realized it sort of appealed to this kind of curatorial urge I had too, that I'd already been doing different curatorial projects, and I felt it was kind of similar in some ways. And what did that mean? And then what is a result? And so for me, it's often been, curating has been questions that I don't have answers to, and I sort of curate something to try to figure it out and see if it works, you know, and try to come up with different solutions. And then writing tends to be more about when I think I know what it's about and I want to get it out there, as opposed to sort of a lot of questions. So it became a tool, but also a forum to create that sense of community and be able to talk about different kinds of aspects of art, because, you know, the medium does impact the kinds of conversations you can have. I mean, it just does. I mean, if you're a podcast, an audio podcast, certain types of work are just going to work better, you know, and it's just, and you can actually discuss it. And the internet is the exact same, though obviously we all know the internet is changing very fast. It's not what it was 8 years ago. So that's also kind of like also being able to chart how, you know, art sort of functions in that space, and also how it's changed over the years was really important.
Just so good. So can you talk about just going on how you developed Hyperallergic, like from nothing, right, from scratch. Can you talk about how both of you sustain a creative life? Like, how do you start from scratch, and how are you doing it now? Like, how are you sustaining your lives? So, like, Michelle, can you just say it briefly? Probably not.
Well, I think that the way I've always approached being an artist, I think I learned a lot of things in home ec. And I think I always view my my art life and my whole life as being one, and that I'm creating my own kind of home economics. So maybe I'm an amateur economist, and so like I know what the input is, I know what the resources are, I know what I want out of it, and it's a kind of equation of, you know, how much time, how much dollar bill, you know, how much food is required, you know, what sort of space, how many hours. And I try to go work in that zone where I can make everything happen. You know, so I know the term entrepreneur is a little overused, and I don't really feel like happy about that word, but I feel like I almost like the IRS, like head of household. You know, so I'm like head of household, and part of what happens in the household is that, you know, people got to eat, people got to sleep, you have to have a shelter, the bills have to be paid, and then there's got to be, you know, some drawing, some painting, some paper mache, some visits with other people, some wine to share. You know, it's like, this is like how to have a happy, creative life.
Like it's all in one blender.
It's in one blender, yeah,
right.
sure.
I cringed a little bit. I'm sorry, Layden, I just have to go off on this. Because entrepreneur, like if you look it up in the dictionary,
Yeah.
it says it's for profit, right? So that's overused a lot. I think that entrepreneur, like a lot of people say, oh, artists have entrepreneurial spirit to it, or they're entrepreneurs. I mean, yeah, but it's not solely towards profit, right?
Right. Well, what, you know, an entrepreneur traditionally might view profit as just, you know, money, but the profit of an artist's experience is having
Correct.
the quality of life that
Correct.
you want and being able to share that with other people. So, you know, that's like the definition of success might be different for everybody. And I feel like I grew up in a household where my dad was an architect who worked for himself, and he made his own hours, and he worked in the home. And so I kind of, you know, and then the parents were shocked when I didn't, you know, want like an art director job in advertising. Or I was like, well, where would I have learned about that? You know, he was in his pajamas drawing buildings. So, you know, and mom was a school teacher who worked with teenagers. So I am the perfect result of those two individuals in my life.
It's great. I found that actually in my research that a lot of artists, they're hooked back to their family in some way. Okay, Layden, how do you do it?
Well, speaking of family, I ran as far as I could from what family was supposed to. I mean, my father was an electrician, and he really wanted me to follow in his footsteps. And it was a nightmare for me to think of being in this hot van all day, like sitting around, crawling in attics and things like that. But for me, it's really juggling a bunch of different balls at the same time. Basically, in terms of the artistic practice, I've always kind of approached it from a direction of experimentation, and I've always felt that experimentation should a lot of times remain disconnected from profit, and so that kind of created this strange dichotomy that I lived in, where the practical side of me did work in advertising, and so, you know, working in advertising was creating a sort of stable scenario for me to think, because I found it also difficult to put all my eggs into the conceptual art basket and having to live on ramen noodles. So I was kind of, you know, okay, well, I need to have a sort of practical part that's market viable, and then that way I can experiment as much as I want on this other side of things. And so for a while that worked, and that's kind of led to, I guess, all of the balance that we have today in this kind of creative ecosystem that we've created in a way where you know, we, both myself and Francis Trombley, who's here, my partner, I mean, we have our art practices. We're also parents, so we have to kind of juggle that space. And then a long time ago, you know, I decided, well, I'm going to just start my own, you know, studio, because I can do this on my own, and have never looked back. So it's all kind of this balance. And then when we introduced Dimensions Variable, it was in a way, shortly after becoming parents, it was a way to kind of engage the community further, because our own lives were becoming complex, and we didn't have, I guess, the same schedule as before to attend all the openings and to be as social as we were. So it just created this sort of loop that sustained our existence. You know?
Another blender.
It's pretty much a blender,
Right.
and we've so much tried to figure out how to subtract one of the components.
Yeah,
It's
Wait.
it's impossible.
well, when you subtract, you add too, right?
It's like a yogurt maker.
No,
You know those
Cuisinart.
little things where there's
Cuisinart.
like, there's like
it
bacteria and things
perfectly.
grow. You know what I mean? And then you have all these little pots and things are growing. Yeah.
Okay, so in all of this, all of you are generous, and that's a big word I use all the time. I'm not tired of it. I think generosity fuels opportunities, right? And I think all of us make our own opportunities. And I wanted to ask I'm jumping around in the questions that I gave you all. So, Hrag, how can artists be more generous? How can they be generous? How can people in our community be generous to be able to foster more opportunities? Because right now, I think we need to do more of that, more than ever, right?
Well, I'm talking from the perspective of a writer and a critic and an editor, and I just find that often, particularly when I'm going to communities outside New York is its own kind of ecosystem. So I think New York is not always the good model to talk about as terms of like the rest of the world. But, I find that the artists who are sort of the hubs of information are often, the ones that you sort of want to talk to. And they really play such a crucial role. And I think like projects you've created, this idea of like being able to be a hub and then that generosity of being able to share that experience with other people and create a platform for them ends up leading to other opportunities and helps them mature their own work. And sometimes that's at least the experience I found. And I think it's, I think that we're in a field where often people feel like they need to hoard. We're in a field where scarcity and all these sort of things play with your mind, like the idea of like, I need to get to the top and I'm the only one that's going to get,
That's a rat race.
Right, it's a
I
rat
don't know what
race.
the
It's
top
not,
is.
right, because it's not a real kind of thing. There isn't necessarily one top or anything like that. But those people that sort of stay open and generous to their communities, I think it really does show. And I think it does show in a lot of ways, and not just necessarily in their work, but just in the fact that they end up becoming the people you kind of, when you go to those communities, they're the ones you talk to. They're the ones you sort of the point of access, and they're the ones that help other people sort of like access different things within their community. So, often I always look for those people when I sort of go to a city, and then the next thing I do is figure out where all the artists are working, right? And those are the people that are like, you got to go to that studio building, and and then they become a real sort of important piece of that. And I think, and then they become, everyone sort of gravitates around them. I think that's just sort of what happens.
I mean, Michelle, do you think that artists need to be more generous? And what does that mean?
Well, I actually think that Miami, for being a smaller city where we all tend to know each other pretty well, I think there's a really good vibe in Miami for sharing and helping. And even from the top, when local collectors brought Art Basel to Miami, and that was a tremendous thing to happen to this sort of weird peninsula that's separate from the rest of the United States in many ways, and it brought this global light on Miami. But then the local artists, have the benefit of living in a city that things all haven't all been done already. It's not like New York or Boston where, people are a little bit more, oh yeah, that's been done, and then, yeah. So it doesn't, since I've been here, which is almost 20 years, there's been tremendous growth. And I think it's really all happened from local artists. Locust Projects is one of the most substantial and nationally known organizations here in Miami, and it was started by 3 artists that were camping out in a warehouse in a neighborhood that was nothing, and which is now, well, it's beyond, it sort of had peaked, and to me it's like, oh my God, it's like another kind of crazy shopping mall at this point. But it's it's been through the efforts of individuals in Miami that the tremendous growth has occurred, and so I find that it's very conducive to new things happening and to getting in on it. If you're a new arrival and you want to introduce yourself, I think it's pretty welcoming.
It sounds really positive. Like,
I think so.
is it that sunny, everybody?
I'll do the negative.
Well, no.
Go ahead.
Because
That's
I
why
usually do the
said
negative,
that.
so
And
there you
I
go.
I looked in the audience because they're with us, right? All of these artists, we're here together. So, okay, can you, shed a little bit more at what your opinion is? What do you think? I mean, what about the generosity here?
Well, I mean, for example, like one of the things that we kind of talk a lot about and set out to do was, in a way, break everything that's common in the procedural that the art world sort of exists in. So like one of the things that we wanted to do was, like, for example, Locust is a great example. Everybody loves Locust, including me. I think it's an amazing institution. They've given me opportunities that, are priceless. However, it's something that was sort of in a way handed off from the artist that founded it. And it's kind of, there seems to be this kind of pressure to grow for institutions, and that growth means handing it off and developing this huge board and so on and so forth. And then it gets to a point where the artist to whoever else, whether it's curators, collectors, and what have you, ratio of running an institution kind of starts to fall apart. And so something that we wanted to do was, how do we create a project that stays small, stays nimble, it can respond quickly to things, and it stays artist-centric, run by artists. It stays, even if we create a board, we keep artists as a majority on the board, or us as directors stay on board as directors to keep a mission very focused. And so everything that we've kind of done has been based on, how do we break the typical functions of the art world? How do we, okay, we're going to have a fundraiser and we're going to ask all our peers to donate work. Okay, well, we've been in that scenario many times. And for us, it's great. We donate a work. We're helping to support, the project that we want to support. In return, we don't get a tax break and we get a drink. In return, the people who fund the space, right, they get a piece of art that's accruing in value, possibly, that's worth far more than what they paid for the original fundraiser. So we were like, well, how do we dive into all these little minute little things that are problematic and figure out a new way around this? And so we thought, well, let's start giving percentages back for the silent auction. And I remember being in a fight, Francis and I, and like at that point, it was multiple people in the project. Adler was another artist that was part of DV, and we were having this whole argument about how much percentage do we give back, and I was like 50%, and everybody was like, no, you're crazy, we're not going to raise any money. And so, and then, it was like, oh, well, galleries give 50%, so that's like a gallery thing. And it's like, what do you mean it's a gallery thing? And so there was this whole back and forth, and for the initial one, we decided on 30%, but eventually, it's become, more than that, and just all kinds of things like that we've been trying to sort of dismantle in a way. And I'm going to bring in a word here that an artist who we recently worked with just used in a wonderful text dialogue that we had yesterday, and that's solidarity. Mm-hmm. And that word, when I read it, I was like, wow. This idea that they're developing this solidarity within the artist community to tinker and break apart the systems that we continue to bitch about and make something better. And I think in a way, like, we've been looking, and sadly enough, like, we're like, I'm getting inspiration from the 60s from this, but there's, projects around that are doing, interesting things. There are artists in Miami who are running galleries. There are artists in Miami who are starting all kinds of projects, publishing books. Like, it's awesome. And I think more of that. Because it's incredibly important, and so we're just kind of trying to just break apart all these systems and make something better.
You want to comment on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, I just love what you said about the breaking apart, because I think it's, and I think it is a generational issue sometimes. It's like one of the reasons is that when we started Hyperallergic and other things I've done, it was amazing to me when I would write for publications and they were like, oh, we're going to pay our writers eventually. And then all of a sudden you realize the resistance often came from an older generation of artists who didn't necessarily think that art writers should be paid. Like, it was weird. I mean, things went, and you realize that there are certain biases that kind of get baked into the system every generation, and we're trying to break them apart. So I totally could relate to that. I mean, that was really confusing to me. I was like, an artist actually told a bunch of writers that, and we were like, what? And they were like, oh, because they had this very like romantic idea of what we're doing, and I was like, I don't have capital I could just sit on and, you know, and do this. Like, this is not a thing.
Don't you think the art world has a lot of those? I feel like they're like 19th century ideas about like patronage and taboos about, you know, artists can't, you know, I feel like if I want to open a gallery, I'm going to call it the Vanity Gallery, and I'm going to put my name on it. And you know what I mean? Like, any other business, you can rent a space, open your business, put your shingle out there, and deal directly with the public. And artists are like always hiding behind, you know, certain protocols of the patronage of the gallery, and they can't ask for this, and they can't do that.
Absolutely
and,
hate
you know,
it, actually,
yeah,
because
I can't deal.
exactly what you're saying too, Layden, is that part of the problem is the artists in our community, because to me, I don't think there's enough artists who can get over those fears in a way to break out of that system, because I actually don't think that, I think it's 0.001% of artists who actually sustain a creative life from galleries. Galleries are part of an ecosystem, but that's not enough. And if anybody saw that report that came out from Art Basel this summer, it says across the board that 20% of sales are down from galleries, but they should just be part of the ecosystem. I mean, if we actually put ourselves forward beyond that and not care as much, right, about that validation. I agree that artists and everybody needs validation, but we don't need permission, right? So I wish we could change that. I think that's a problematic that artists like, and also one other thing about the donations. One time, one of my works was flipped at auction that was bought for, so the collector got a lot of money out of it. The institution got a lot of money. I didn't even know who had bought it because they wouldn't release the name. I mean, there's no power back to the artist. The only people that can demand it are us, right?
Well, I mean, it's a difficult argument because the entire system is created in a certain way, so it almost feels like going through school, you're conditioned that you shouldn't be thinking in a, to bring back a horrible term, entrepreneurial way. And so you're taught theory and you're taught formal, you know, studio practice, but the business end of things don't come into that. And it's like, well, but if you're going to go out into the world and be dealt with as a sole proprietor, you know, and you don't know how to, like, it's just odd. But then there's also all kinds of taboos and all kinds of, you know, where, you know, artists are put in a certain place where you're not allowed to, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, so many things like, you know, collectors can sit on boards and they can donate and they have all this power. But then as an artist, well, it's like, well, you couldn't possibly donate your work to a museum, you know. And so there's all these kinds of things that are set, and one kind of wonders and questions why these things are in place and how they're in place. And it's just kind of odd to me. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think also as an artist who also works as sometimes a curator for museums and other nonprofits and a creative director, I mean, it's really not that hard to make the standard, you know, auction where the artists donate to be also beneficial to the artists, and actually open it up to the people who are purchasing the art to make it a more rich experience for them. I mean, 3-4 different institutions I've given my program. The artist donates a work, sure. Yes, they can get a percentage of the sale, but also they should be introduced to the collector, and the collector should bring a friend to visit the studio of that artist, and they should purchase one other work each. You know, there's a million ways to do this, and the organization doesn't have to just like take work from the studio. They can also do a program where they select artists and they create prints and they create a subscription. I mean, you just have to be like creative. As creative as you are as an artist, you can be out in the world where art gets disseminated, and bring your own weird ideas to the table and make it happen. You know, there's nobody like holding a gun to your head and saying, "Oh, you got to do it like it was done in 1897." You know.
In a way, I love what you're doing, because so much of the ideas that we've brought to the table to break the system in a way come out of like technology.
Right.
Yeah.
In the way that like
Disruption.
the disruption that certain technology has created within certain industries, but also the generosity factor in technology that I kind of touched on, where you've got these sort of tech giants that are slowly being unseated by new startups because they're changing the business model. So it's going from the fact that you all had to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars on Adobe software back in the day, or pirate it, which is what I used to do, or and now like the way that the business model has changed, these new startups decided, wait a minute, why can't we just give it away for free and then add more features later and then create this different economy? And so they've literally been changing the entire system. And so we've been taking these cues of like, for example, the blogosphere and like how the way that like the generosity of offering information for free turns into opportunity somewhere down the future. And,
I have to say, maybe I'm the only one who loves talking about money with artists and writers, because I actually find it really interesting in that it gives you a lot of information. It's actually one of the only conversations that class comes up in the art world. Like, we love to talk about class, but we don't like to. And I'll tell you, if I talk to someone about money, I could probably figure out like what they grew up. And there are all these weird markers around money that are really, really fascinating. And I think it's like, and I think whenever people want to remove that conversation, it's usually, I feel like, to sort of mask something. And I think that's something we need to get past. Where it's sort of like, no, we just have to be honest about what we're talking about. And so like often when people are like, I don't want to talk about money, say that, I'm like, why don't they want to talk about money? Well, who's benefiting from this conversation? And it's like, so for me, that's often one of the most interesting insights you can get, because when that comes up, all the things, their education, everything is sort of like laid bare sometimes. And I think that's really, really useful, like so you can just sort of be honest and start from an honest place.
I think that's good, but also, yeah, I think that's good. That gets also to like the difference between perception and then the reality of things too. Like the art world, I think its foundation is perception, where there's a lot of false perception, and yet, because I know people, for example, like one artist who's now deceased, I won't mention his name, but he was showing at a big corporation. That's what I like to call them, the big galleries in New York. And so he was showing at a big corporation, and the perception was he was making so much money, but yet he still had a studio in the Bronx and struggling a lot and owed the gallery money at the time of his death. So you just never know, right? I actually don't believe it, really, that a lot of people, I think it's very, very small number of artists that sustain their creative lives solely out of one source. I really believe that.
Absolutely. That's very rare. And I think even if they have that success, it's short-lived. To sustain it for an entire lifetime, to be able to just sell your work through a gallery, there are very few.
So I just want to finish before, is everybody getting warmed up for your needs and wants? So you probably know them off the top of your head. But, we're in this crazy political climate, right? Everybody familiar with that?
What's going on?
And I'm still bothered by this. This tour is sort of like therapy for me, actually. So and it's amazing. Somebody, right after the election on Facebook, somebody said to me, and I make abstract work, and somebody said, you should make political work now. You should change who you are. I was so mad at this guy. I swear to God. I took him out to lunch, and we talked about it. So anyway, I think some of the most political work, quote unquote, is abstract and meaningful, like it used to be called degenerative in the 1930s and 40s. But also just the argument, too, of making work as a source of creativity and free expression, that it is political. Like, you could make that argument. So someone had also come to me and said, what do you think of the term artist-citizen or citizen-artist? And I found this term on the Aspen Institute Arts Program, and they defined it as individuals who reimagine the traditional notions of art making and who continue to contribute to society either through the transformative power of their artistic abilities or through proactive social engagement with the arts in realms including education, community building, diplomacy, and healthcare. And I brought this up on Facebook yesterday, saying I was going to mention this today, and Mary Judge said on Facebook, she says, you know what, I'm not political, I just make my work. I'm like, you know what, just because you make work that may not be perceptually political, we can do things as artists that can make movements in communities. Just even simply sharing somebody's work on Instagram and pushing it out there, pushing that free expression out there. So I also think that the mantra, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I wonder what you think about it, and also as far as raising the bar as artists to raise our value in Miami. What is Miami doing, and what do we need to do as artists here in order to do that? To be able to raise the value of the arts here nationally too when it seems to be declining. And how can we be a part of that mix? Michelle. Oh, I gave you this question.
That was a big question. There were a lot of things in there.
Right.
But I could say the very simplest answer is just education. I've always said that. If you want art to be part of everybody's life, you want people to appreciate it, you want people to attend exhibitions in museums or in somebody's backyard, you want parents to support young people becoming artists, you want them to learn how to make things with their hands, because I work with a lot of young people, and this is a rapidly declining, scenario, to actually make something and to have the attention span, to have skill to work with materials, and to also be able to perceive and enjoy and enter into an art viewing experience in the climate of the immediate gratification of social media that a lot of young people are brought up in. So I think very simply, any effort to share the joy and the excitement and the spirit of art, whether making or viewing, that's number one. Your citizenship idea, I think, is super interesting, but I would even say that artists go beyond. I mean, citizenship is something that's part of an American heritage that we inherited from, Magna Carta, European, ideas of what a citizen is. But I think, I would say my personal sense of citizenship, completely transcends being part of any particular nation or having any responsibility to that nation. And it goes much more in towards a human citizenship. I'm a human among other humans, and I recognize all of you as such. I will treat you as such, and I count myself as one of you. And I think that is far higher to me than citizenship in the average sense of being part of a nation or a tribe.
That's cool. Layden?
I was just thinking about, again, that word solidarity. And, I would say one, I get so annoyed when I hear that phrase that you mentioned.
Which one?
I just make the work, it's not political, or...
Right, that's
or
what I'm trying to, because I do think that
like-
some artists feel sort of left out too, they feel like they don't have a place, in this conversation.
But I almost feel like when I hear that, it's almost like the equivalent of I make work in my studio, but I don't want anybody to see it. So it's kind of
That's
like,
interesting.
well, what's the point? And in a way, I mean, the only reason I make work and mention that separation of profit and work for my practice is because I feel like I have to get those ideas that are very socially engaged out there in a way that's disconnected from the commerce end of it. And so I think the act of making work in any system is political, period, no matter what you're doing. And you can say and try to theorize the hell out of it that well, I'm not political, I'm not making political art. And it's but you're trying to engage an audience. The moment you engage an audience, you're already kind of putting an idea out there that's pushing that audience. The moment you push an audience, it's got some kind of citizenry to it, some kind of activism to it. In terms of Miami, I think, just engaging more. I mean, I think a lot of times we've had conversations about things that are happening here that are maybe outside of the art world but affect the art world. And you hear a lot of bitching but no action. And I think that there have been individuals in town that sort of engage and start that publication, or start publishing, or open a space, or do whatever, and or engage with the community through activism, or through the legal system, or with the city. Art Center is just launching a program that is placing an artist within Miami Beach in order to get them engaged with the city and how the city is starting to deal with sea level rise and these kinds of issues. That's amazing. That's exactly the kinds of stuff that we need to be doing, bringing in that kind of conscious thought. And into, at the end of the day, there are these people that are making huge decisions. And if you want to have some kind of iota of influence in that, you have to get involved. I mean,
Right.
we were trying to, as naive as this may sound, when we moved into a space in the north part of downtown with a couple of other projects that we shared, this big warehouse. And, it was this big conglomerate developer that was donating this warehouse that they didn't even use. And there was this kind of optimism inside of my being that was thinking like, wow, if we could have a kind of conversation at any point in this relationship as to the awareness of the arts in a developing community, how to not displace organizations or artists, and how to be conscious of the fact that the reason you're able to develop downtown is because people are wanting to move back to downtown because of all the cultural activity. And we can now point to cultural activity being extremely profitable with Art Basel Miami Beach.
But that happens though, and then artists are kicked out, from
Yeah,
that gentrification.
Exactly. We
So
were hoping to
hopefully you're gonna
have
stay.
a conversation to say, how can we make you mindful of the benefits of keeping some of this creative class here
Yeah.
instead of displacing?
Okay.
And making some adjustments where maybe that is some kind of tax benefit or something that, I don't
Okay.
know, but
Very cool.
it failed, but we'll try again.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think what we're doing that is working, first of all, is the fact that I think we're expanding the idea of what art is. Because I think if we're going to be a multicultural, very embracing culture, we have to change our idea of what contemporary art is. And it is changing. I think we're seeing it. I think slowly it's embracing, like the kind of artistic production the community I grew up in, was not considered art, right? It's like, I don't know if other people had experience. When I went to study art history in Toronto in the 90s, people would be like, oh, that's ethnic. Or like that's derivative, or those were real words that were used, right? Like when
We get provincial.
It's provincial too. Well, when I tried to study like Middle Eastern modernism, people were like, "Oh, that's derivative." Do you know? Like, really? That's actually what people would say, and people would not allow you to study things, in departments. And you're like, "Wow, this is really ridiculous." But that's slowly changing. Sadly, I think it's a top-down change, which I don't like. And I think one thing I would love us to do is be more membership-based, by which I mean like so many foundations are deciding for us what ideas need to be promoted. And you're like, wait, well, if we had, and that's partly the weakness of the nonprofit model, I think, in my opinion, where the nonprofit then ends up relying on this, and you're like, wait a minute, do we really need to do that? Or are we doing that because we know our funding depends on that? And you're like, I worked at an Armenian nonprofit that didn't get any other funding, from governments, and it was all membership. And I know that was so I didn't realize how rare that was, but we had 25,000 members, and we had $30 million budget a year. And I was like, could you imagine an art organization doing that? That would be radical. That would change the whole conversation. If you could get 25,000 people giving a budget of $30 million, and all of a sudden somehow an organization is connected to a real membership and a real community, rather than having to wine and dine a bunch of donors. It's like, and we don't have that. We don't have the equivalent.
It sounds like unionizing.
Almost, but it
Yeah.
wasn't. It wasn't even, there was none of that.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just
No,
saying
no.
like it's uniting around common interests.
The only reason I'm doing that is because in America, that word is like, everyone's like, let's run. So it's like, but if we could create some sort of organization I mean, then you have real political power. Then you can enact change. So it's not just piecemeal, because I think sometimes we fall for the trick that, oh, you're getting media attention, it's like somehow it's real. And we all know that's not real. I mean, it's partly real, but it's not. It doesn't actually enact change because there's no policy behind it, do you know? And I think the one thing I'm seeing that's really, I think, slightly working is a lot of artists that are dealing with activism now are actually dealing with policy wonks, you know, like they're actually sitting down with academics and going, how do we do this? So like, I'll tell you, the activists in the South Bronx are literally meeting with like policy people at Columbia University to figure out what is the step in the process of rezoning that you can actually enact change. We all thought it would be like, oh, no, after the report comes out and like you could like, you know, argue and you're like, no, the policy people are like, once the report comes out, it's done. Like, you know, like they were not going to change that. You had to like already do the activism 2 years before that in order to enact change. So it's even sharing that information to know, like, to rezone a neighborhood. By the time that's out, they have a plan. There's 15 years planned already. People have invested. Nothing is changing. You know, but this is where like the community can figure out by making those coalitions. And we're talking about solidarity. That's a form of solidarity, right? You know, I mean, we see that, I mean, for better or worse, Boyle Heights in Los Angeles, there's a whole movement there that people kind of are surprised about. And that's partly because these are activists who are literally been doing the work for years. And all of a sudden, they're enacting what they've been working on. And you're like, and everyone's like, where'd they come from? Well, no, they're doing exactly what the policy people are doing, which is planning, you know, and saying, okay, what do we do next? What do we do next? And it's hard to get people to agree on that, but it's crucial.
It's not about demonstrating, it's about strategizing.
Right.
And it's about doing, just really doing. Okay, so now, what do you want? So we're going to pass around a microphone. So who would like to start a conversation here? Yes, we have somebody. I was afraid that I would have to call on people, but no, thank you. You saved me.
Okay, so we.
Hi, who
Hi.
are you?
Hi, good.
No, who are you?
Oh, who am I? I'm a question maker.
Oh, no, what's your name?
Alexander.
Oh, hi, nice to meet you.
Hi. So we've been talking about kind of this idea of, I mean, obviously, the artist as a cultural producer, and kind of talking about like the practice as kind of a whole life situation, building what is not there, and kind of like passing it on. So my question for you all is, what do you want to leave behind?
Ooh, that's a hard question. Who wants to take that? What does that mean, though? Like, what do you mean by that? Like when we die or something? Like what? You're leaving it wide open. Wow, that was like a big volleyball. Like, you go.
Okay. I mean, as a writer, I kind of want to leave, you know, text behind, right? I want to leave what it is, the different ideas I'm discussing. That's what I want to leave behind. Do I know how those are going to be used? No. And I actually am fine with that. You know, I don't need to control that narrative because I found brilliance in so much art and text that probably wasn't being valued during its time, and that's fine with me. Do you know? So I don't feel that urge, but at the same time, I'd like to, you know, leave my little corner of the universe a little better than it. You know, I mean, I know it's idealistic, but like that's fine. I'm an idealist.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody I think about a lot is like Martha Wilson and like what she's leaving behind. She directed Franklin Furnace for such a long time, and you know, she had this incredible archive of all these projects that happened in New York through a period of time that now lives in Pratt, right? Is where the archive lives. And you know, it's just amazing to see like how much dedication she sort of put into this concept. There wasn't this idea of like, oh, let it fizzle out in a couple of years and I'm gonna go do something or get some cushy job somewhere or whatever. So for me, that's incredibly inspiring. We just had someone of equal caliber leave town from Tiger Tail, Mary Luft, who, you know, I, from afar, was a fan, even though I didn't know her really well. And she came to Dimensions Variable before leaving town, and I like just took her away and was just like talking with her. And, she's, like what, in her 60s? And she was talking to me about, being down in Miami and like being a pioneer in like performance art in like the 70s down here when everybody thought this was like a swamp, And that to me was like, that is innovation. That is someone who is in the middle of nowhere, technically, thinking about these ideas and sticking to them. And she ran this organization for so long, doing amazing projects. And stories that she was telling me about, getting into a station wagon and like driving across the country to go see this like new performance that she had heard of, to invite them to come down to Miami to do something. And it was just giving me goosebumps, And so in a way, like I'd like to leave like something that, again, that little corner of the universe that left something of meaning that helped, other people, that in a way like was one of those systems that I guess deconstructed and dismantled something that maybe wasn't working, That's what I hope.
Michelle?
I'm not really sure how to answer that. I think in some way I feel like the point is to like live really rich but die broke, and not, like I feel like I'm not a person that wants to like head a large organization and leave that kind of big thing. I feel like I'm really interested in one-on-one always. So in all those one-on-one interactions I have with fellow artists and students, and in conversations like this where you have the opportunity while you're alive to really just like really pay attention to what's going on and to really, come at life and its challenges in, my own personal way, and just to leave the experience of that, I think that only by, and as much as I love the idea of the organizing and everybody being part of this one giant coalition, I'm somewhat skeptical of how successful things can be when they become, kind of institutionalized. And I always feel like things that happen in small groups and in small interactions are really powerful. And so I think the idea is just to have those kind of interactions as long as you can, and then the memory of those. And if my work lives into posterity, and I think posterity is such an interesting concept, it's like nostalgia on the one hand and posterity and the vague future. I don't, who knows? Maybe I'm...
Though I will say I don't believe in the one thing. I just think
Yeah.
it should be many.
Yeah, exactly.
But by the way,
Lots of
Sharon, you
sparks.
didn't answer.
Thanks, Raj.
Yeah. Yeah. Books.
Yeah, like these books are essays by 40 working artists who are very generous, and I want to bring forward more stories. I'm contracted to bring in a lot more stories coming forward, but I want to create pathways that are permanent, that maybe go under construction every now and then, but they're like roadways that artists can drive easily on, and they can take their journeys freely to create opportunities through these voices and have these voices stay alive. And that's my interest. I choose artists to work with because I want to get to know them. I want to be closer to them or even just to even have an association with them if I don't know them. Half the people in this book I didn't know before starting this. So it's sort of like a way of creating community. And then when those voices come out, they create other conversation, and then it keeps alive. And for me, that's the most important thing. Also, I really believe in women speaking loudly. So next to those I'm just imagining now, I'm visualizing it, that those paved roads, there's speakers with women saying things as you drive by. That's a fantasy for me, yeah. So loud. It's great. Okay, who's got another thing? Oh, there's somebody back there. Hi. Thank you for that question, by the way. I've never gotten that question before in 69 events. Amazing.
All right, we have one over here first.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't see. Sorry, hi.
Okay, hello. My
Pardon
name is
me.
Eva Silot Bravo. I'm a professor at the University of Miami, and I'm writing a novel. I have a blog that I write about music, etc. I'm very happy to be here, and especially I would like to point out two issues. I'm very happy that we're talking about culture, and this is a word that we usually don't use a lot in Miami. We talk a lot about art, but culture is not something that you usually listen, and I think the conversation needs to raise a little bit, and in terms of talking about culture, because I see that in relationship with the model that we live in the city. Are we what is it that we are? A multicultural city? A ghetto city? Is it a city in which we have communities that are really not connected at all? Do we want to work throughout different communities to create institutions that really represent the diversity and the talent that this city has? These are questions that I still have. I'm writing about it. I really feel that Miami needs contributions from all of us. Anything that we think that Miami needs, we need to make it happen in a way. But I'm kind of, probably it's just an opinion, but I think artists here spend more time trying to get funding than really thinking about art sometimes. And it's really a pain, and it's a reality, I know, but where I'm going with all this is, what is our contribution to the city that we're living in terms of thinking on ways to make the city more culturally oriented? Not only real estate projects, but really across the board, in which you have a voice if you think that they're making a building, and culturally, there's something that really doesn't fit, and it's going to create an impact, a negative impact to a community or something. Where do we have these real conversations? And this is something I think I would like to hear from you guys about. What are your ideas about this?
First of all, can you say where people can read your writing, your blog and stuff?
Well, my blog name is Cubanidad in Between, so it's bilingual, but you can find there in English and Spanish.
Yeah.
But sure, Cubanidad in Between. So thank you.
So Layden, can you start with that? But can you be briefer? Because I know that that's a big question, but can you briefly say, I think the big thing is, what do artists think the city needs as far as culture? Is there an assessment of the things, and also what are the partnerships like? We're here in this museum. How can these museums even be more accessible? What is it that fluidity can happen to raise that bar? I hear this not just from here in the city, but in many different places that I've gone to that are outside of bigger cities.
You mind if I answer?
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing I think the art community does really well that I think we should do more of is I think the art community is a microcosm of society in general. So I think what we do is sometimes we can really experiment. And one of the things I cover often at Hyperallergic are protests, right? Let me tell you how many times I've had to talk to museums and be like, why are you guys so against protesters? These are people who are clearly passionate about your institution. They may not agree about it, but it was kind of amazing because then the Me Too protests that happened at the Met Breuer in New York, all of a sudden a shift happened where the museum was like, maybe we should actually talk to these people. Do you know? And it was amazing because I was on a panel with the head of the Met a few weeks before that, and he was kind of a little almost freaked out. I mean, you remember, weren't you there? He was almost freaked out when I was like, every protest I've covered, those people are really smart and they know the issues. They're not just sitting there going, tear it down. They're saying, tear it down because I want it better. Do you know? And it's so that means they probably give sustained thought. And so sometimes the art community allows those little opportunities because we're a pretty sophisticated crowd, It's with a lot of education, a lot of whatever you want to call it. So if we could figure out ways to create those microcosm conversations and then see how they can kind of grow in different ways, I think that would be a huge benefit.
I can maybe get into some more of the negatives that I didn't get into last time, since you asked that question.
Drink. I need a stronger drink.
But I do feel that there are a lot of isolated communities. I do feel like, there is a bit of a kind of somewhat of a rat race, and I think the city has grown culturally very quickly, so I think that adds to it. So I feel like, in my day, when I was here in '97, it was just, it's it wasn't necessarily the same. So I think we kind of went through our growing pains differently. We collaborated, we did shows in crappy warehouses and like things like that, where I feel like now it's like, you're coming out of, a school here and you're looking for that gallery. So it's a really weird disconnect between, when I got out of school, my work was nowhere where it was supposed to be. So it's like, how do you deal with coming out of school and going straight into like a major gallery exhibition and then going to a major fair, international fair, So I find that that's a weird disconnect that I feel like in this city, it's exaggerated. And I feel like everybody's working towards that. And then I want to go back to the word solidarity, because I feel like because of that, right, there is a kind of strange, like, where instead of all of the grassroots organizations or like artist-run spaces or whatever, like really coming together, they'd rather collaborate with ICA and the major institutions, because here in Miami, the distance between the major institutions and the grassroots is tiny. So that's accessible because you have accessible for funding and so on and so forth. But I find that kind of, well, wouldn't it have meant more if that collaboration happened at the grassroots level? And so, it was interesting when we worked to bring the Common Field project here. A bunch of us got together, Locust Projects, BFI, Dimensions Variable, Wavemaker, to bring this organization to Miami, because we felt it was a very important time to bring that organization to Miami, because the organization is so centered about independent spaces, artist-run spaces, that community. And we felt like Miami is growing so quickly and everybody's just trying to jump that step to the top that we're losing sight of what's so special about that and what's so empowering about that place. And something amazing happened that I hadn't necessarily participated in. I hadn't seen it at this level. Courtney came in, everybody came in, and we had this whiteboard going, and we were like writing down all the projects, like all the grassroots projects, the individually initiated projects by an artist, by a dancer, musician, whatever, that were in Miami. Because we wanted to bring these people into a room, that room being Locust Projects, and talk about what's needed, talk about what they wanted to talk about, what subject matters they wanted to cover in this big symposium that we were bringing here. And I was like, wow, like all these people are here, and I've never been in a room with all these people. But why is it that it took an outside entity to come here to make us reach out to bring all these people together? And so I remember talking with like Naomi and stuff and being like, wow, like this is amazing, and we've never done this before. And yes, there's like, differences of opinion and what's needed and what's not needed or whatever, but it was still this sense of community at that level that was so inspiring and energizing that I think we need more of. So.
Do you have something brief you want to add?
Super brief, yeah. I think that in Miami, the experience I've had is that it is a very kind of ghettoized city, and there's a lot of stuff that happens, under the rubric of culture that happens in a more, like the more privileged real estate, tourism, luxury concept, and there's a huge, huge bunch of neighborhoods that compose Miami where young people are not even aware of what's going on over here down by the waterfront, and and that when there's an opportunity to do something, I feel like everybody, they keep like playing to the choir, preaching to the choir. And so I love the diversity in different parts of Miami that I think are somewhat invisible, and it would be really fun and a challenge for local organizations here to, even if they just view it as for their own self-interest, to grow their audiences by creating projects that happen off-site in other areas, or setting up outposts, or employing people, just connecting the whole city a little bit more than like the small, already in the know parts.
I got you. I didn't forget. I see you too.
Hi, my name is Sonia Baez Hernandez. I'm an artist. I have some comments about the need, but before I do that, I wanted that we would think about how we get together as an artist, because I think that when we think about the ideology or the idea of what is an artist, usually it's very individualistic, searching for those projects. If we rethink, like for example, during the Depressions, there was a union of artists and that they were organized, and they did protests for salary, for access to places that they can produce work and so on. And I think that we don't have a platform or a place where we could articulate any type of policy against gentrification and how artists are being used to gentrify neighborhood in the 60s now, and then they have all these cultural institutions then that participate on, and then they do not provide any type of protection to the artists when management, for example, abuse the artists and so on and so on. So
Okay.
I think
So
that we
can
have
you
to think about
Tell me a question.
the question is, how to basically articulate a type of union membership in where then we could have access to, access to insurance, medical insurance.
Right.
And we have access to, instead of having gentrifications, that we have artists co-op for housing, things like that, that somehow then it would break the type of systematic practice for year from developer and also with the participations of cultural, at least cultural institutions, and for example, in Florida and nationally.
Okay, so 2 comments to that first before, and Layden, you guys, we have to be brief because we're running out of time. We have to be brief in answering this, but Wage, do you know wageforwork.com? Wageforwork.com. You've got to look at it. Wageforwork.com. Who knows about it? Okay, so the fact that all of you don't know about it is a problem. So wageforwork.com. That I'm grateful that some of you do, because that's a powerful organization that gives guidance as far as how artists should be paid. That's really, really important. And then also, are you contributing to the conversation to start that platform?
Yeah.
Right. So I think that are there people here who are doing that, who are starting to come together to create a group that could possibly, is that possible even?
If the question is generally like how to provide more support
Just
for the
she's
lives
asking for a
of
platform or
artists,
union.
I don't know of any right now.
Dimitri does.
Okay.
There is? What is it?
There's an organization that's national called the Freelancers Union. So if you
Oh yeah, Freelancers
Yeah,
Union,
sure.
right.
If
Do
you
you know
go
the
beyond-
Freelancers Union? So you can look at that.
But for the last 40, 50 years, we've sort of given up control of the community, right? Like all those people doing the gentrification are on the boards.
More artists on boards.
It's true. I serve on boards, and you just have to position yourself in that and becoming a partner with nonprofits to be able to contribute to that, to change that direction.
And it bleeds through. One of the things we're sort of researching now is the fact unionization of security guards at museums and institutions. The last 40, 50 years, there's been an erosion of that. Why is that happening? Do you know,
Yeah.
that's a small example, but that's one example of a much bigger problem. Do you know, it's and then we can go down and there's every single thing, there's things like that have happened.
I think also I'm glad you asked that, because part of this tour is when one person speaks up and talks about it, then oftentimes artists go to that person and say, I know this, X, Y, and Z, and would you join this? So I'm hoping that people after this will come to you and say, hey, I would like to be with you to be able to create or contribute to a platform. That would be great. I do think it's an issue, and I think it's really important. But this is the solidarity problem, because artists don't want to necessarily come together, and that's where we really have to come together more. Okay, so no, but before Dimitri, I promised her. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Hi, I'm Carrie C. I'm a visual artist. And when I first moved here in 2007, I went to a little kind of alternative art space, the name of which I don't remember, where they had a bumper sticker that I loved that said, "Money makes art." I don't know if any of you remember who that was. And so while, Layden, I understand your point about separating the income from the creative output, I do think that for a lot of people, it's true that really money does make the art. If you don't have it, then you aren't free to experiment. You aren't, well, I guess it actually is kind of what you were saying too. It's not in opposition to it, but
So
that leads me to the question
Yes.
of, do you think that it's only the artists who can affect some kind of change in how well artists are paid? Or do you think that there's a potential for raising awareness among wealthy people and getting them more interested in...
You mean depending on the kindness of others?
Well, maybe
Never
not the
work.
kindness, but the...
Are you saying that, I mean, first of all, if you're thinking about cultivating more collectors of the wealthy class, is that what you're saying, to go back into an old system that's deteriorating?
No.
Probably not.
No.
So what is with the wealth that your wealthy people that you want to be able to have them give you more?
Well, I don't have a plan or a...
I mean, I just hear
I'm
that.
asking-
I think that if you want money to make your work, we can get jobs, right? Why do artists have to expect it from other systems? That's what I would like to know.
But why should artists be expected to make what they make for nothing?
Yeah, but why?
Other people make things, and everyone values them as things.
Yeah, but why? Okay, hold on. I got to relax.
Oh.
So I'm not. I mean, I'm just passionate. You don't know me, but I'm passionate. So I think it's a privilege to be an artist. Seriously, I think it's a very big privilege. We already know what we want to say and how to say it. We have creativity and free expression. We have the ability and capability to do that. Why should somebody take care of us to have our freedom of speech? Why are we dependent on other people to do what we can do for ourselves?
I'll tell you why. No.
What did you say?
I'll tell you why.
What? Yeah, tell me why. Go ahead. Why?
I mean, it's like a whole insider trading scheme. Come on. I mean, it's like...
What? Wait. What do you mean by that?
First of all, okay, using the word privilege.
Yes.
Right, we're privileged to do what we do, right? Well, that's used against us. So in the way it's used against us is like, oh, well, you would do what you do anyways. You love it, so why pay you? That's one.
That's
not to
okay,
mention not to mention that it might be perpetuated with the whole system, possibly from like academia up through like, you know, again going back to formal and theoretical, and that's it. But then you know, think about it. Like as artists, we hold our own copyright for the work we make. However, every time that work is sold at auction in perpetuity after it leaves our studio, we see nothing.
No,
Exactly,
in California
but
though, they
in
have
California,
that law.
yeah,
In California.
yeah.
But hold on, I want to go back to what you just said. What I mean by a privilege is sometimes though artists think that, oh, woe is me, I should be paid for what I do because I'm making the world a better place. There is truth to that. Like I said, we contribute to the well-being of others. But we are also human beings that contribute to society like many other people. So I do think that we're not mining coal at 6 o'clock in the morning, right? We're not slaving away at wages that are I mean, the whole idea of starving artists, right? I think that's over. I think the artist hero is over, and that's what I mean. I think that we have to adopt who we really are today. And when we do, we can see then the gallery system is a partner. The museums are partners. They're all partners. We're all on the same page. Hrag is a partner. Writers are partners. We have exchange. That's what I mean. So there's different ways of looking at that privilege. Would you agree with that?
Completely.
Say again? Well, but why can't we go towards that? But why can't you at least go towards that?
parking.
I have problems.
And the parking.
I already have seen the show,
Right.
so I was not interested.
Right.
So I still have to pay $32 because it's 16
Right.
So it's not a struggling artist situation. It's how you manage to cope with the society. I've been here for 15 years, and Miami is not really helpful in many situations. Plus, it is a ghetto, a community of ghettos. Plus, I've been gentrified 3 times for my studio. There's no affordable studio space. If it's not again for the great Michelle Weinberg, who built a hell of a lot of artists here. Oh my God.
Okay, so I'm going to respond to you. So I live in New York, so I'm with you about the housing and all of that. I don't even have to say that I've moved 8 times in my life. I'm 53 years old. I get it. I had a house fire, too, in Brooklyn. That moved me to Minneapolis, drained my savings, and moved back to New York. Crazy why I moved back to New York. But anyway, the point is, but the point is, though, what we can do in the minutia, right? It's not going to change overnight. But we can be more empowered to say, hey, call the Pérez and say, why is it $16 for me to come here? So why didn't you say that instead of, you did, and what did they say?
Layden said that the Pam, I actually
No, did you call Pam? Okay, well, that's what I'm talking about. I think I know you. I think I know you. I think I feel you. I feel you. I feel you. And I love that you're powerful. Right.
I think it should be free for artists.
I do too.
Did you call about the artist membership? I mean,
No, but the point is that I'm with you 100%. Okay, but I'm with you 100%. But I guess my point is back to what you just started. This is not going to happen in your lifetime. It can incrementally start, right? You could make a call to an institution. This is the point I'm trying to say, is that in that privilege as an artist, right? This is where I'm saying, why can't we take the assets that we have and do things with it?
And do you know how Free Days at Museums started? Workers' Art Coalition protesting and demanding access. I mean, you can do that.
I love you. I mean,
Could I interject?
We have
one
to go
thing?
soon. Really go soon.
I just want to interject one thing that I know this is a panel about artists, and we're all like super special, and we are amazing artists. But I have to say,
we just
no. I have to say that everybody else out there who's not an artist is kind of moving a little bit towards, the traditional struggles of artists, in that there's not a lot of job security for everybody. Families that used to exist on a single person's income can no longer do so. So when a lot of people, prognosticate some dire future for the economics of the United States of America, I just say, bring it on. I've been there for years. So artists, in a way, we're experienced in these, in challenges and meeting challenges. And I think that the purpose of your book and all of the voices and the stories is so that we can inspire one another to take the steps that we're able to take. And we're not all able to take the same steps, but to in our little, realms of influence to, change it up, disrupt, break down, whatever, and make some new pathways, new possibilities, for sure.
I'm going to leave Dimitri with the last, because he had a question, but you've got to make it brief, if you don't mind. Do you want to just stay up on stage? Okay. I love your shoes.
Okay. As a son of a Lebanese dad and a Haitian mom that moved to a city of immigrants, it's not a question. You said wants and needs. I have a need and a want. 2 years ago, I would have never thought to put the word immigrant in my Instagram or social profile. Now it's the first word. If you're an immigrant, do the same thing. If you're not an immigrant, you're a migrant if you're in this city. Take action. Let people know who you are, because our voices are being erased. We're being shipped off to other countries, and that's a privilege that we have that does not really apply to citizenship. I'm a citizen and an immigrant, and I'm not ever going to forget that in the climate that we live in. So, thank you.
That's so nice to hear that. Well, thank you, Anita and Adrian and Franklin, for being here. And thank you. I'm going to meet you after. I'm going to get to know you. I have a problem, an email problem right now. I can't answer all of my emails, but I can try. But if you want to email me, I'd be happy to continue the conversation. But we're also going to be here for this book signing, so come forward and talk to us. You can find my emails info@sharonlouden.com, and I hope I see you in the next 6 to 8 months on the rest of this tour. Thanks very much for having me, and thank you for being here. And thank you all, Hrag, Layden, and Michelle. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much.